हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको अल्फ्रेड लॉर्ड टेनिसन के लॉन्ग आंसर के बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन है, राइट ए नोट ऑन टेनिसन एज ए रिप्रेजेंटेटिव पोएट ऑफ द विक्टोरियन एज। आंसर, इंट्रोडक्शन। टेनिसन इज एज मच ए रिप्रेजेंटेटिव पोएट ऑफ द विक्टोरियन एज एज चौसर वाज ऑफ द 14th century and Pope of the 18th century. England. Tennyson's poetry reflects the true spirit of the age. It may be noted that he is not a mere follower but an interpreter of the age. There is nothing prophetic about his writing. His truly representative characters made him universally popular in his own age. As a matter of fact, no poet excepting Victor Hugo held any country so long under his unbroken sway. The sanguine spirits of his early writings, with their overflowing faith in science, commerce, and progress, the religious struggles of his middle manhood registered in memoriam. The excitement which fills the pages of Maud, the gloomy foreboding of his epilogue to the idleness of the king and the second luxury hall, even the chastened hopefulness of the dawn, the dreamer and the making of man, these are not expression of personal feeling only, they are reflection also of successive moods of the generation into which he had been born. It is this sensitiveness to his surroundings, to the shifting currents of thoughts and feeling of his generation, which made him an exceptionally popular poet. Let us see the victorious characteristics of the age as reflected in the poetical works of Tennyson. Heading a democratic note. Victorian age was an English of democratic spirit. Common people were fighting for their equal rights and political freedom. Tennyson himself belonged to the upper middle class and could not transcend the limitations of his class. This attitude towards the common man was that of the cultured aristocratic outsider, but he favored peaceful and slow evolution rather than any kind of struggle or revolution. His attitude was one of compromise between the claims of the masses and those of the landed aristocracy, but he had little support for the demand of equality. In the Lord of Burleigh, he supports the claim of the landed democracy. However, in the Princess, he deals with the question of emancipation of women according to Tennyson. Men for the field and women for the hearth, men for the sword and for the needle. See, men with the head and women with the heart, men to command and women to obey. All else confusion. Heading a claims of science and religious, the Victorian compromise. One of the major features of the age of Tennyson was the rise of scientific spirit. Tennyson's attitude towards scientific progress was skeptical. Sometimes he spoke of science with impatience. Sometimes he shrank back in dismay before the immensities of science. In fact, Tennyson swung between the two extremes of science and religion. Life seemed to him a moment between two eternities. In memoriam, he says, What am I? An infant crying in the night, an infant crying for the light, and with no language but a cry. This was the cry not of Tennyson alone, but of the whole generation whose faith had been rudely shaken by the discoveries of science. In memoriam thus appeared alike to the man of science who found that he was understood, and also to the common man oppressed with doubts and fears. It gratified also the Orthodox, who was finally assured that somehow good will be the final goal of it. Tennyson was deeply impressed by the importance of the human mind before the eternal enigma of things. He was also keenly alive to the discoveries of science and at the same time passionately anxious to conserve the hopes of men. He was thus peculiarly fitted to become the poetic interpreter of the spiritual unrest of the age. Its two voices of faith and doubt. He had glimmering of evolution before it was clearly enunciated by Darwin. It also reveals a wondrous knowledge of astronomy, but against scientific materialism, he always asserted his belief in God and immortality. Science left its mark on mode also. The evolutionary tendencies of the poet are unmistakable here. So many a million of ages have gone to the making of man. He now is first, but is he the last? Is he not to base? The same evolutionary thoughts is reflected in the following lines from the closing portion of In Memoriam. A soul shall drop from out of vast and strike his being into bounds, and moved through life of lower phases result in man. The struggle between scientific outlook and religious faith made the masses more and more skeptical. In such a situation, Tennyson sought to reach a compromise. This compromise was the need of the hour, according to Nicholson. The Victorian desired to be assured that all was for the best. They desired to discover some compromise which is, without outraging their intellect and their reason, would nonetheless soothe their conscience and restore for their faith, if not completely, at least sufficiently to allow them to believe in some ultimate purpose, and more important still in the life after death. Tennyson attempted to arrive at the compromise which the Victorian had desired him to do. They craved for law, order, and stability. Thus, the dominant note of Tennyson's thought is his sense of law and order. In a passage in Memoriam, he says, "Let knowledge grow from more to more, and more of reverence in us dwell, that mind and soul according well may make one music as before." Tennyson advocated slow progress and stable freedom, which slowly broadens down all from precedent to precedent. But he was not against the claims of science. In some stanzas in the Memoriam, he puts forward the claims of science. He preferred honest doubt to blind faith. There remains more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creed, having a didactic spirit. The Victorian author and poet played the role of a moral teacher. Generally speaking, the Victorian had a keen fascination for moralizing and preaching. Tennyson understood pupils' exceptions, and thus he played to admiration the role of poet-philosopher. In one of his earlier poems, the poet he tells of the mission of the poet. A poet is a golden climb, was born with golden stars above, dowered with the hate of hate, the scorn of scorn, the love of love. He saw through life and death, through good and ill. He saw through his own soul the marvel of everlasting will. An open scroll before him lay. The viewless arrows of his thoughts were headed, and winged with flame. According to Tennyson, the poets function by not to delight only, but to teach the masses, the statesmen, and even the intellectuals in hours of perplexity. Statesmen turned to him for light and wisdom. He taught people to be moderate, patient, and tolerant. His message of action appears in Ulysses. Strive to seek, to find, and not to yield. And he prescribed the hearth as the woman's sphere per excellence. Let her beware of harboring aspirations, intellectual or social, that might draw her away from that magic ring, lest she should become a social nuisance. Men for the field and women for the hearth. ये दोबारा रिपीट किया गया है, पीछे रिपीट हुआ है यही. He improved his lyrics prestige to glorify nation, self-righteousness, and invested jingoism with the sanctity of a cardinal Christian virtue, and he did this all the more insidiously for professing to exalt internationalism, that man's the best cosmopolite who loves his native country best. To the great cause of freedom drink, my friends, and the great name of England round and round. Love and marriage heading है. The Victorian believed in conjugal love rather than romantic. Tennyson supported this view most devotedly. He could not allow passion in love, any relation between man and woman other than the married one was not sanctioned by him. As Campton Ricketts observes, Tennyson elected to treat of love not with Byron as an element force, or with Shelley and Browning as a transcendental passion, or with Rossetti as a mystic mingling of sense and spirit, but as a domestic sentiment. The Miller's Daughter is a simple story of true sweethearting and married love, but raised into a steady and grave emotion worthy of a love built to last for life betwixt a man and woman. This was the sort of love for which Tennyson cared, for which Byron and Shelley did not care, which was not at all in the world where Keats lived. However, Tennyson prefers spiritual love to the physical. He advises, arise and fly, the reeling fawn, the sensual beast, move upward, working out the beast, and let the ape and tiger die. As far as illicit love is concerned, Tennyson had the greatest abhorrence of it. In the Ulysses of the King, he considers the guilty love of Launcelot and Guinevere responsible for the death of Arthur. According to Nicholson, it is curious, for instance, to observe how constantly in his abhorrence of the illicit love he threw a domestic atmosphere even over the pre-conjugal relations of his characters. Thus, in matters of love and marriage, Tennyson had typical Victorian view, heading a patriotism. The Victorians were intensely patriotic. They took pride in their queen and national glories. Tennyson shared these feelings of his countrymen. In his poetry, the sense of national pride and glory is well. The northern farmer is the true picture of Lincolnshire peasants and northern cobbler and village wife are the national portraits depicting the rustic life of England in the English Idylls, Idylls. Tennyson's reflect the ideals of widely different types of English life. Speaking of England, Tennyson says, "It is the land that free men till then sober suited freedom choose, the land where a man may speak the thing as he will, a land of settled government, a land of just and old renown." Tennyson's patriotism is narrow and insular. His praise for his own country is the expression of the Victorian patriot who considered his country superior to all other countries of the world. He says, "There is no land like England, where are the light of the day. There are no hearts like English heart, such hearts of oak as they be." Last and conclusion. Tennyson presented in his poetry all the essential features of Victorian life, the ideas and tastes, the inherited predilections belonging to his class and generation. Moderation in politics, refined culture, religious liberalism conquered by doubt, a lively interest in the advance of scientific discovery coupled with alarm lest it should lead us astray, attachment to ancient institutions, larger view of duty of state towards its people, and increasing sympathy with poverty and distress. All these Victorian feelings find expression in Tennyson's poems. Next question is, write a note on Tennyson as a lyric poet. Heading introduction. Tennyson was by temperament a lyric poet. He had been endowed with all those qualities which would have made him the supreme lyric poet of his country. But unfortunately, the poet did not strictly follow the lyric force of his genius and allowed his lyric energy to be obscured by less vital elements. Instead of remaining a singer, voicing forth the subjective feeling that welled in his heart, he chose to be a dramatist, a narrative poet, an ethical teacher, and a communal bard. This association of Tennyson with other energies, ethical, theological, and didactic, along with his lyrical energy, certainly bedimmed the glory of his lyrical genius and made him more of a philosophic thinker than a pure lyric poet. Had he realized that what he felt was infinitely more important than what he thought, he would have been another Shelley or Swinburne in English lyric poetry. But Tennyson was forced by circumstances into 50 years of unnatural objectivity. He chose the easier and more prosperous course, says Harold Nicolson, of becoming the laureate of his age. He subordinated the lyric to the instructional. His poetry thereby has lost one half of its potential value. Heading his lyric gift. Tennyson had an innate lyrical gift. The lyric impulse never died in him. The primary force of Tennyson's poetry, as Nicolson maintains, is his lyrical energy. Though often obscured by less vital elements, temperamentally he possessed all the qualities of a lyric poet. His genius was essentially subjective. His was a lovely soul, melancholy and afraid. The deepest note in his soul is one of frightened agony, as of some wild creature caught in a trap at night. His lyrical gift is closely associated with his mood and temperament. As Grierson observes, Tennyson is a poet not so much a passion and passionate thinking as of moods subtle and luxurious and sombre moods in which it is not always easy to discern the line that separates waking from dreaming. Heading his lyrical output. In spite of the fact that Tennyson allowed his lyrical genius to be dominated by philosophic thoughts, his lyric flow could not be completely ebbed, and from time to time the poet composed songs and lyrics of exquisite beauty and loveliness. The restraining force of caution and philosophy could not chill the ardor of his soul, and lyrics and songs continued to flow from his pen right from the age of 17 to the ripe old age of 80. Tennyson could keep up his power for melody and song even to the age of 80. During the long span of his poetic career, he produced such fine pieces of lyricism as Marina, Orina, Fatima, Mamam, and Mermaid, The Miller's Daughter, The Lotus Easter, Brick, 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 The Dream of the Fair Woman, Luxury Hall, The Brooks, The Splendor Falls on Castle Balls, Tears, Idle Tears, Come Down into the Garden, Maud, O Swallow, Swallow, in Memoriam is marked with the intense lyricism. In this poem, majority of lyrics are of complex and reflective nature, but they are certainly a landmark in English poetry, combining as they do the poetry of ideas with the poetry of feeling. These songs and lyrics attract by their luxurious melody, their tilting music, their alcoholic chiseling of phrase, and their exquisite finish. These lyrics are masterpiece of his genius. Commenting on the greatness of these lyrics and songs, a critic has aptly pointed out Tennyson's genius is lyrical. He has the great gift of song, though without the rapture that sometimes attend it. Whatever he touches, he transmutes into a sweet melody, simple and personal, or rich and sonorous. Heading music and melody. Tennyson's lyrics are extremely melodious and musical. The poet has a trained and refined ear for music and metrical harmony, and the metrical flow of his lines is completely free from the defects of rhythm and melody. He knows the art of harmonizing the sense with the sound of the words employed in his lyrics. Done rightly, writes, he is a great poet because he is a great artist, a master of words and meters, a maker of magical music. Tennyson's music varies according to the thought and emotion. In Memoriam, subtle variations are seen in pause, cadence, and rhyme. Thus, monotony is avoided with great skill. In Lotus Easter, the music is perfectly in keeping with the atmosphere of languor. Mark, for example, the following lines. There is a sweet music here that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass, or night dews on hill, still waters between walls of shadowy granite in a gleaming pass. Music that gentler on the spirit lies than tired eyelid upon tired eyes. Celine Court observes that the charm of Tennyson's best lyrics lies in the secret and indefinable beauty of words and tone. The brook come down into the garden, Maud, Brick, Brick, Brick are some of the most musical poems of Tennyson. Heading: Note of melancholy. Note of melancholy is one of the essential features of lyrical poetry. Tennyson's lyrical gift is nowhere so well employed as in giving expression to a sense of losses reflected after the occasion of grief and brooded over intellectual anguish and social suffering. The interest of in memoriam lies no longer in the religious compromise it embodies, but in the moods of terror and despair and the haunting bell of fear and loneliness heard again and again in it. Similarly, the idols of the king are suffered with the poet's own mood and emotions. Crossing the bar expresses the poet's pensive but bold mood just on the eve of his death. Even in the legendary poem The Lotus Eaters, the lyrical gloom is reflected in these lines. Death is the end of life. Ah, why should life all ever be? Heading: a limitation of Tennyson as a lyric poet. Tennyson's lyrics and song, in spite of all the eulogy that they have borne from critics and admirers of his poetry, cannot be placed in the first rank of lyrics and songs. As Albert points out, on the whole his nature was too self-conscious and perhaps his life too regular and prosperous to provide a background for the true lyrical intensity of emotion. The lyrics of Tennyson, with all their charms, hardly scale the radiance of a lyric by Sappho or Sophocles. They fail to move us and strike a sympathetic chord in our heart. Even some of the lyrics of pathos and mourning fail to move us. Oliver Elton is of the opinion that Tennyson is more at home in classical lyrics. Ode-like or commemorative, carefully concerted pieces, be they short or long, with full rolling lines, than in the briefer, spontaneous kind. Rarely his songs attain the same intensity as the songs of Burns, Scott and Shelley do. Their pathetic strains do not move us to pity and despair. Even the music of Tennyson's loveliest song is somewhat languorous. It is music that gentler on the spirit lies than tired eyelid upon tired eyes. The music is a little cloying. The song failed to appeal to our feeling. No one can dispute the feeling of Tennyson's lyric, but it is usually clothed in such subtle graces of fancy, in such artful cadences, in such enameled coloring, that it strikes the imagination more than the heart. Even the music fails to attract, for it appears the music of recitation, of memory, of thoughts rather than of song. The song of Burns, as my love is like a red, red rose, or the devil came finding through the town, are more attractive and appealing than the songs of Tennyson. In them we feel the lack of feeling and genuine emotion which we come across the Shakespeare songs, which such as Full Pathom 5, Thy Father Lies, or Tell Me Where Is Fancy Bred. Tennyson's song and lyrics thus fail to appeal to our heart with the same intensity and emotional force as the lyrics of Burns and Shelley appeals us, but comparisons are odious. Tennyson, in spite of shortcoming in his art, is a lyrical poet, and some of his lyrics and song will continue to provide a feast of delight to the readers, for they have at least the gift of melody in them. Thanks, best of luck.